The sacred fire crackles in the center of the ceremonial cave. Thick smoke of hallucinogenic herbs fills the air, making the paintings on the walls dance as if they were alive. 20 clan members form a circle, their eyes fixed on the young shaman in the center, Arak, only 23 winters old, the youngest shaman the Three Mountains clan has ever known. But tonight, something is terribly wrong. Arak staggers, his eyes rolled back, showing only white. His mouth foams, his body convulses violently. He should be in a spiritual trance, communicating with the ancestors, predicting where the bison herds will be on the next moon. Instead, he is shouting nonsensical words, scratching his own face until it bleeds, pointing at the shadows and yelling about something no one else can see. "The spirits are furious," he shouts, his voice distorted, unrecognizable. "They are coming. They are coming to take what is theirs." And then, in the most terrifying moment, the small child in her mother's lap, the daughter of the clan leader, begins to convulse as well. She coughs up blood, her eyes roll back, and before anyone can react, she stops breathing. Deadly silence fills the cave. Everyone looks at Arak, not with reverence, not with respect, but with horror and fury. The shaman brought no blessings, he brought death. But to understand how we arrived at this catastrophic moment, we need to go back. We need to understand who Arak was and how a promising young man became the most controversial shaman of his generation. 15,000 years ago, in what would one day be called the Pyrenees region of Europe, human life was governed by both the visible and the invisible world. Shamans were the bridge between these two worlds, healers, prophets, communicators with the spirits that controlled hunting, weather, health, and destiny. Arak was born under a lunar eclipse, an event the elders considered prophetic. His grandmother Mira was the clan's supreme shaman, a feared and respected woman who claimed to speak directly with the spirits of dead ancestors. From the time Arak could walk, Mira trained him in the sacred ways. He learned which plants caused visions, which healed wounds, which brought dreamless sleep. He learned the ancient chants that opened doors between worlds. He learned to interpret signs, the flight of birds, the patterns of clouds, the dreams that came in the darkest night before dawn. But most importantly, Arak had a gift that even Mira recognized as rare. He truly saw, not just visualizations induced by sacred plants, but genuine perceptions. He could sense the presence of animals before seeing them. He knew when storms were coming days before they arrived. Occasionally, he had visions of future events that proved frighteningly accurate. The gift is both a blessing and a curse. To see beyond is to know things that others cannot comprehend. You will always walk between two worlds, never fully belonging to either, Mira told him one night, her old wise eyes reflecting the light of the campfire. Arak didn't fully understand her words at the time, but he soon would, in the most brutal way possible. When Arak was 20, Mira fell ill. A fever that no herb could cure consumed her frail body. On her deathbed, she summoned Arak and the clan leader, a strong and pragmatic man named Torak. "Arak is ready," she whispered, her voice weak as wind through leaves. "He will be shaman when I am gone. Listen to his visions. Trust his gift." Torak hesitated. "He's young, inexperienced. Perhaps we should call upon a shaman from another clan to guide us." "No," Mira insisted with the last of her strength. "Arak has the true gift, something I haven't seen in generations. He will see things others cannot. Trust him, especially when, his visions seem impossible." She died that night, and Arak, ready or not, became the shaman of the Three Mountains clan. The first few years were surprisingly successful. Arak conducted healing rituals that saved 3 children from deadly fevers. His predictions of herd movements were accurate, leading to bountiful hunts. He identified an area that would flood during the spring thaw, saving the clan from losing its stored supplies. But there were those who distrusted him. Kale, the chief hunter, and Torak's brother never liked Arak. "He's strange," Kale muttered to anyone who would listen. "He spends a lot of time alone in deep caves. He talks to things that don't exist. One day his madness will cost us dearly." And then, 3 years after assuming the role of shaman, came the fateful night that would change everything.
Arak had been having disturbing visions for weeks, images of dark spirits, of something ancient and furious stirring in the depths of the earth. He dreamed of caves he had never seen, paintings he had never created, and a voice calling to him, demanding something he didn't understand. Desperate for answers, Arak did something Mira had expressly forbidden. He entered the deep caves, a system of tunnels that plunged deep into the mountains, where, according to legend, the first shamans had made contact with the oldest and most dangerous spirits. There, in the dark depths, illuminated only by his trembling torch, Arak found something that took his breath away. A chamber covered with paintings thousands of years old. Not just animals, like the paintings he knew, but humanoid forms, figures with horns and wings, and in the center, a painting that made his blood run cold. It was a huge, dark spirit surrounded by prostrate human figures, and beneath it, symbols that Arak could somehow understand, as if an ancient knowledge were awakening in his mind. "The Lord of the Depths," he whispered, "the first spirit, the one who demands tribute." It was there, in that forbidden chamber, that Arak found the sacred fungus, a substance he had never seen before, growing on the damp walls. He knew, by instinct, or perhaps by something more sinister, that this fungus would open doors that had never been opened before. It would allow communication with spirits beyond the normal veil. He should have left. He should have retreated. But curiosity, the desire to understand his visions, the pride of wanting to prove he was worthy of his position, all of this led him to harvest the fungus, to bring it back, to use it in the ritual. On the night of the ritual, Arak prepared the sacred potion as he always did, but this time he added small amounts of the fungus from the deep caves. He told no one. He did not consult the elders. He believed he controlled his gift, that he could manipulate whatever the fungus revealed. He was terribly wrong. When the potion began to take effect, Arak didn't enter a controlled trance. He was ripped from his body, thrown into a vortex of visions, so intense, so overwhelming, that his mortal mind couldn't process them. He saw the past and the future simultaneously. He saw spirits that weren't benevolent protectors, but hungry, watchful entities, observing the human world with predatory eyes. And he saw the Lord of the Depths, not as a painting, but as a real, vast, and ancient presence, imprisoned in the depths of the earth by ancient shamans, an entity that demanded tribute, that fed on vital energy, and which Arak, in his arrogance, had awakened by using the sacred fungus without proper knowledge. The spirit tried to use him as a conduit. He tried to enter the physical world through Arak, and in the process, his energy spilled out, touching the nearest child, Torak's daughter, draining her life force in seconds. When Arak finally regained consciousness, the chamber was in pandemonium. The child was dead. Torak held the small body, tears streaming down his normally stoic face, and everyone stared at Arak with a mixture of horror and hatred. "You killed my daughter," Torak said, his voice dangerously calm. "With your cursed ritual, you brought death instead of blessing." Arak tried to explain, his tongue heavy, his mind still fragmented. "It was an accident. I saw something in the caves, an ancient spirit. I didn't know." "Silence," Kyle roared, advancing with a spear. "You are not a shaman. You are a murderer, an arrogant fool who toyed with forces he did not understand." The elders gathered. The debate was short. Some argued for immediate execution, others wanted torture. But Torok, even in his overwhelming grief, was a just leader. Exile, he finally decided, his voice breaking. Arak, you brought this tragedy with your arrogance. You broke the sacred trust of the shaman. You can no longer live among us. He approached Arak, removing the bear claw necklace that marked the shaman. You have until dawn to leave. Go to the desolate lands to the north, where no clan lives. If you return, or if you cross paths with any of our people again, you will be killed on sight. Arak tried to speak, tried to beg forgiveness, but the words died in his throat. What could he say? A child was dead because of him. His arrogance had brought catastrophe. As he gathered his few possessions, his shamanic tool bag, a cloak, and a spear, he could feel everyone's eyes on him. There was no compassion there, only fury, fear, and revulsion.
At dawn, Arak began his journey north. Each step took him further from everything he knew, to lands avoided for good reason. The northern region was arid, cold even in summer, plagued by sudden storms and dangerous predators. But the physical exile was nothing compared to the inner torment. Arak saw the face of the dead child every time he closed his eyes. He heard his mother's cries echoing in his mind. He felt the crushing weight of his failure. He had been blessed with an extraordinary gift and had used it recklessly. He had been entrusted with the sacred position of shaman and had stained it with innocent blood. He had disregarded Mira's warnings and paid the ultimate price. For 3 days he walked, barely stopping to eat or sleep. His mind was a whirlwind of guilt, pain, and something else, a persistent feeling that he was not alone. Something followed him, something invisible to mortal eyes, but always present on the fringes of his perception. Was it the Lord of the Depths? Had he truly awakened something ancient and terrible? Or was it just paranoia, his mind breaking under the weight of guilt? On the 4th day, exhausted and delirious with thirst, Arak collapsed into a rocky ravine. The darkness claimed him, and he willingly surrendered to it. Perhaps it was for the best. Perhaps death was the only fitting atonement for his crime. But as consciousness drained from him, Arak heard a voice, not in his ears, but directly in his mind. A voice that was ancient and wise, different from the Lord of the Depths, something more familiar. Rise, grandson of the spirits. Your journey does not end here. It only begins. What you awaken cannot be undone by your death, only by your redemption. It was the voice of Mira, his dead grandmother, calling him back to life, calling him to a destiny he couldn't yet comprehend. Arak awoke not at dawn, but at dusk. He had lost an entire day unconscious in the ravine. His body was stiff, his mouth dry as dust, but he was alive. And more importantly, Mira's voice still echoed in his mind. Your journey doesn't end here. He dragged himself to a small nearby stream, drinking greedily. His reflection in the water shocked him. Sunken eyes, face covered in dirt and scratches, cracked lips. He looked more like a wandering spirit than a living man. Perhaps that was exactly what he was now. Neither alive nor dead, trapped between worlds just as Mira had foreseen years ago. As the night deepened, Arak built a small fire, not for warmth, but because fire had always been his link to the spirit world. The dancing flames calmed his mind, allowing him to reach that state between wakefulness and sleep where visions came more easily. Grandmother, he whispered to the flames, if you were truly here, if it wasn't just a delusion, show me what I should do. For a long moment, nothing happened, only the crackling of the fire and the distant howling of the wind.
Then, in the flames, Arak began to see shapes, not clearly, but suggestions of an image. A small, huddled female figure with long hair that floated like smoke. "You have awakened something ancient." Mira's voice came, distorted as if traveling a great distance. "The Lord of the Depths is not what you think. It is not evil by nature. It is hungry. It was imprisoned thousands of years ago by shamans who did not understand that powerful spirits cannot simply be contained. They must be fed, respected, or freed." Arak felt a chill run down his spine. "Did I free him?" "Not completely, but you cracked his prison. And now he extends through those cracks, touching the world, causing imbalance. The child's death was only the beginning. If he is not stopped, more will die. Not out of malice, but because he feeds on vital energy without understanding that humans are fragile." "How do I stop him?" Arak asked, despair tinging his voice. "I am exiled, alone, powerless, without sufficient knowledge." The form in the flames pulsed. "You must learn. You must seek those who came before. There are sacred places, Arak, places where ancient shamans left knowledge. Follow the river that flows north. It will lead you to the Valley of Echoes, where the stones speak with voices of 1,000 years." Before Arak could ask more questions, the form vanished and the fire returned to being just fire. But now he had a purpose, a path.
For the next 5 days, Arak followed the river as it meandered north through increasingly desolate landscapes. Vegetation thinned out, replaced by bizarre rock formations sculpted by ancient winds. He hunted small animals with his spear, gathered roots and berries, always keeping on the move. But he wasn't alone on his journey. On the 3rd day, Arak began to realize he was being followed. Not by humans, but by a wolf. A large, solitary male with silvery gray fur and a deep scar across his left eye. Lone wolves were dangerous, driven from their packs, desperate and unpredictable. Arak should have been afraid, but there was something in this wolf's gaze, something that seemed aware. On the night of the 4th day, the wolf approached Arak's camp. It kept a respectful distance, but was clearly interested. Arak, remembering his teachings on reading spiritual signs, observed the animal carefully. "You're not just a wolf, are you? You're a guide, a messenger." The wolf inclined its head, as if understanding. Then it did something extraordinary. It bowed in submission, a gesture wolves only made with the upper members of their pack. Arak felt tears sting his eyes. He had been rejected by his own people, branded a murderer and a failure, but the spirits still recognized him, still guided him. "I'll call you Scar," Arak said, pointing to the wolf's scar. "You and I both marked, both alone. Perhaps that is our strength." From that night on, Scar became his constant companion. The wolf hunted for both of them, warned Arak of dangers, and provided warmth on cold nights. More importantly, his presence was a constant reminder that Arak was still connected to the spirit world, even in exile. On the 7th day of his journey, Arak arrived at a place that took his breath away. A circular valley surrounded by limestone walls that rose like fingers pointing to the sky. In the center of the valley was a circle of monolithic stones, each twice the height of a man, covered with carvings and paintings worn by time. This was the Valley of Echoes. As Arak entered the valley, he immediately sensed a difference in the air. There was a vibrant, almost electric quality, as if the veil between worlds were thinner here. Every sound echoed strangely, multiplying and distorting in impossible ways. Scar stopped at the edge of the valley, groaning softly. The wolf wouldn't enter. That in itself was a warning. Animals could sense places of intense spiritual power and usually avoided them. But Arak had no choice. If the answers he sought were here, he needed to find them. He approached the circle of stones, studying the carvings. They were incredibly ancient, far more so than anything he had ever seen. Some of the paintings he could interpret, representations of shamans in trance, of spirit animals, of ceremonies. But others were completely alien, geometric shapes that made his eyes hurt if he looked at them for too long. In the center of the circle, there was a natural depression in the rock, filled with crystal-clear water that shone strangely even without direct sunlight. Arak remembered what Mira had said. The stones speak with voices of 1,000 years. He didn't know how to make the stones speak, but he knew how to enter altered states of consciousness. He still had some of the sacred herbs he had brought in his shamanic bag. Not the forbidden fungus from the deep caves. He had discarded that, afraid to touch it again. But other plants, safer ones, that opened mental doors in a controlled way. Arak prepared a small fire and began to brew an infusion. As the smoke rose, he chanted the ancient songs Mira had taught him. Songs in a language no one else spoke, words that were more feeling than meaning. And then he drank the infusion and waited.
The world began to melt. The stones of the circle began to glow with their own light, and Arak realized he was no longer alone. Translucent figures surrounded the circle, shamans from ages past, their spirits somehow trapped or bound to this sacred place. One of them approached, an old man with tattoos covering every inch of visible skin. When he spoke, his voice echoed supernaturally. "You broke the seal," the figure said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "The guardian of the depths is stirring." "I didn't know," Arak replied, his own voice sounding distant to his ears. "I was foolish, arrogant, and a child died because of me." "Yes," the ancient shaman agreed without compassion. "But lamenting doesn't undo what's been done. You must understand the truth. What you call the Lord of the Depths, we called the Guardian. He is neither demon nor God. He is a force, ancient as the mountains themselves." Another figure approached, a woman with snow-white hair. "When the earth was young, great spirits walked freely. They shaped the world, moved mountains, made rivers flow. But they were dangerous to frail humans. So the first shamans made a pact. The spirits would be contained in deep places, fed with rituals, respected, but kept separate from the mortal world." A third spirit, a young man not much older than Arak, continued the story. But with time, the knowledge was lost, the rituals were forgotten, the seals weakened. And when an inexperienced but powerful shaman touches the guardian without preparation, he looked directly at Arak. The seal cracks. Arak felt the crushing weight of guilt return. How do I fix this? How do I strengthen the seal? The three spirits exchanged glances. It was the old man who answered. You can't. What has been broken cannot simply be repaired. But there is another way, more difficult, more dangerous. Which one? You must complete what you began, not seal the guardian again, but release him properly, guide him back to balance. And to do that, you must first become something your people haven't seen in 1,000 years. The white-haired woman finished. You must become a Worldwalker, someone who can exist simultaneously in the physical and spiritual realms, someone who can negotiate with ancient forces and mediate between spirits and humans.
Arak felt both terror and awe. How? How do I become that? The young shaman smiled sadly. Through trials, through death and rebirth, you must travel to 3 sacred places and complete 3 spiritual journeys. Only then will you have the necessary power and knowledge. The old man raised a gnarled finger. First, you must travel to the Lake of Bones, where warrior shamans were tested. There you will face your greatest fear. Only by confronting it directly can you overcome it. The woman raised 2 fingers. Second, you must climb the mountain that touches the sky, where prophetic shamans received visions. At the top, you will see not only the future, but all possible futures. You must choose which path to take. The young man raised 3 fingers. Third, and most dangerous, you must descend to the caves of the first fire, where humanity first mastered the flame. There, in the deepest place, you will find the entrance to the Guardian's realm, and there you must face him, not to destroy, but to understand. Arak absorbed it all, his mind spinning. What if I fail in any of these trials? The 3 spirits spoke in unison, their voices merging into an eerie harmony. Then you will die, and the Guardian will continue to spread, unbalancing the world. More will die, not dozens, but hundreds, eventually thousands, until another shaman arises to fix what you have broken, or until the Guardian consumes everything. The vision began to fade. The spirit figures became translucent, then transparent, then vanished completely. Arak found himself back in the stone circle, the sun rising on the horizon, Scar waiting patiently at the edge of the valley. He had slept all night, but he didn't feel rested. He felt transformed, frightened, but also, for the first time since the catastrophic night, with a clear sense of purpose.
Arak spent the day studying the stones more carefully, finding primitive maps carved into the rock that showed the locations of the 3 sacred places. The Lake of Bones was a 2-week journey to the west. The mountain that touches the sky was a month to the north. And the caves of the first fire? Those lay in the heart of the most dangerous mountains, territory of cave lions and giant bears. He could simply continue north, disappear into the desolate lands, live as a hermit until he died of old age or was killed by predators. It would be easier, safer. But the image of the dead child's face haunted him, and the idea that more would die if he didn't act was unbearable. "I caused this," he said aloud, his voice echoing strangely in the valley. "I have the responsibility to fix it, no matter the personal cost." Scar looked at him, those golden eyes seeming to understand perfectly. Arak gathered his possessions. He marked a rudimentary map in the sand, memorizing the paths he would need to follow. And then, with the midday sun high in the sky, he left the Valley of Echoes with a new purpose in his heart. The journey would be long. It would be dangerous. He would probably die before completing it. But he would try, because it was the only way to redeem himself. The only way to honor the gift Mira had seen in him. The only way to transform his greatest flaw into his greatest triumph. Over the next few days, as Arak traveled west toward the Lake of Bones, Arak began to notice changes in himself. His visions became more frequent, more intense. He could sense spiritual presences that had previously been invisible to him. Scar often stopped and looked at places where nothing seemed to be, but Arak could now see lesser spirits, fragments of consciousness that floated like leaves in the wind. He also began to sense the guardian, not directly, but as a constant presence in the back of his mind, like a distant thunderclap that never quite ceased. The entity was awake, it was reaching out, and somehow it was searching for him. On the 10th night of their journey, Arak camped near a rock formation that offered shelter from the wind. As he prepared a small fire, Scar suddenly rose, the fur on his neck bristling, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Arak grabbed his spear, his senses on high alert. "What is it? What do you feel?" And then he felt it too. Not a physical predator, but something worse. A spiritual presence, malevolent, hungry. From the shadows beyond his fire, figures began to emerge. They weren't solid, but neither were they completely translucent. They were humanoid in form, but distorted, with very long limbs and faces that were more suggestions than defined features. Hungry spirits. The ancient shamans called them devourers. Fragments of spirits that had lost their essence, reduced to pure hunger. They fed on vital energy, and Arak, with his intensified spiritual gift, shone like a torch for them.
Hungry spirits surrounded the camp, their translucent forms swirling like smoke. Arak could feel their hunger, not metaphorical, a physical sensation, as if invisible claws were trying to rip his life essence from within his body. Scar growled fiercely, positioning himself between Arak and the devourers. But Arak knew that physical teeth and claws couldn't harm these creatures. They existed between worlds, vulnerable only to spiritual forces. "Back off," Arak commanded, his voice carrying shamanic authority. But the devourers weren't like conscious spirits that could be reasoned with. They were pure hunger, instinct without thought. The nearest one lunged. Arak felt a piercing chill as the entity passed through his chest, trying to take root, trying to suck his life energy. Pain exploded through his body, not physical, but worse, a sensation of being emptied from the inside out. For a moment, Arak panicked, but then, through the pain, he remembered Mira's teaching. Hungry spirits feed on fear as much as on energy. Deny them fear, and you deny them half their power. Arak forced his breathing to calm. He closed his eyes, and instead of fighting the devourer, he did something counterintuitive. He opened his consciousness completely, allowing the entity to see not only his life energy, but also his memories, his thoughts, his pain. The devourer hesitated. Through the connection, Arak realized something surprising. This creature had once been human, a shaman perhaps, who had become trapped between worlds, gradually losing his identity until only hunger remained. "I see you," Arak whispered. "You were like me, lost, alone. But there is another way. You don't need to consume. You can rest." He channeled energy not of resistance, but of compassion. He shared memories of Mira, of his training, of the teachings on how to guide lost spirits to rest. And through that connection, the devourer began to remember. Remember a name. Remember a face. Remember humanity. The translucent form began to shift, the distorted features gradually reforming into something recognizably human. And then, with a sigh that was both relief and dissolution, the spirit dissolved, its particles scattering like petals in the wind. Freed. The other devourers recoiled, confused. Arak stood, exhausted but determined. "Come," he said softly to the remaining hungry spirits. "I can help you too. You don't have to exist in eternal torment." One by one the devourers approached, and one by one Arak guided them back to their forgotten humanities, freeing them from their eternal hunger. When the last spirit dissolved, Arak fell to his knees, completely exhausted. Scar approached, licking his face, anchoring him back to the physical world. "I understand now," Arak whispered. "Being a Worldwalker isn't about power. It's about compassion. It's about understanding that spirits, like humans, can be lost, wounded, needy." This revelation would be crucial to what was to come.
After another week of arduous travel, Arak arrived at the first site of his trial. The Lake of Bones was exactly what its name suggested, a body of water surrounded by thousands of sun-bleached bones. Animal bones, yes, but also human bones, the remains of shamans who had come here for trials and failed. The lake's water was perfectly still, like a black mirror reflecting the cloudy sky. There was no wind, no sound of birds or insects. The entire place exuded a supernatural stillness that made Arak's skin crawl. He approached the shore cautiously. According to the spirits of the Valley of Echoes, here he should face his greatest fear. But how? The answer came when he looked into the water. His reflection did not show his current face. It showed the face of the dead child, Lyra, Torak's daughter. Her dead eyes stared accusingly at him from the black surface. Arak's heart raced. "No," he whispered. "It's not real. It's just a vision." But then the reflection spoke with the child's voice. "You killed me, Arak. Your arrogance, your recklessness. I will never see my next winter. I will never grow up. I will never love because of you." Tears streamed down Arak's face. I know. I carry this every day. Apologies don't bring me back," the reflection cut him off. "And now you seek even greater power? You who have already proven yourself untrustworthy with the power you had?" It was his greatest fear distilled into words. Not the fear of dying, but the fear that he was fundamentally flawed, that he would always be the arrogant shaman whose mistake cost an innocent life, that seeking more power would only lead to more tragedy. Arak fell to his knees, sobbing, "You're right. I'm not worthy. I should have died, not you. I should—" "Look at me," the voice thundered. But now it was no longer Lyra's voice. It was Mira's voice. Arak looked up. The reflection had shifted again, now showing his grandmother. "Yes, you made a terrible mistake. Yes, a child died. But hiding in guilt doesn't honor her memory. It doesn't bring justice. It doesn't prevent future tragedies. So what do I do?" Arak shouted at the reflection. "You face the whole truth, not just that you failed, but why you failed. Look deeper, Arak. Why did you use the forbidden fungus? Why did you enter the deep caves?" Arak forced himself to think, to truly examine his motives on that fateful night. I wanted to prove I was worthy. I wanted to be a great shaman like you. I wanted to show those who doubted. Pride, Mira's reflection said simply. You acted out of pride, not out of service, not for your people, but to prove your own worth. The truth struck Arak like a spear in the chest. She was right. All of this, the use of the fungus, the ill-prepared ritual, the resulting catastrophe, had roots in his own wounded ego, his desire for validation. Now, the reflection continued, more gently, you must choose. Will you continue acting out of pride, seeking redemption to alleviate your own guilt? Or will you act out of genuine service, placing the needs of others above your own emotional comfort? Arak took a deep breath. I choose service.
I cannot undo what I have done, but I can prevent more deaths, not from my redemption, but because it is the right thing to do." The moment the words left his mouth, the lake changed. The black water began to shimmer with silvery light. The reflections vanished, replaced by his own face, older, wiser, but undoubtedly his own. And he understood. The greatest fear he needed to confront was not external judgment, but internal truth. He needed to accept not only that he had failed, but why he had failed. Only then could he truly grow beyond it.
The mountain was the highest in the region, its peak lost in the clouds. The climb would be deadly. Steep slopes, treacherous ice, thin air. Many had tried. Few had returned. Scar could not make this journey. Arak left the wolf at a base camp with sufficient provisions, promising to return. Scar groaned sadly, but seemed to understand. The climb took 2 days of brutal effort. Arak's hands bled from gripping sharp rocks. His lungs burned with each breath in the thin air. Several times he nearly fell, saving himself only by desperate reflexes. But finally, exhausted beyond anything he had ever experienced, he reached the peak and saw the impossible. The sky wasn't simply above him, it was all around him. Clouds flowed through him like water, and in every direction he could see everything. Not just the physical landscape, but layers upon layers of reality. He saw the world as it was now, as it had been 1,000 years ago, as it would be 1,000 years in the future. It was overwhelming. His mortal mind wasn't designed to process so much information simultaneously. He fell to his knees screaming as multiple realities vied for his attention. "Focus!" a voice thundered, not from outside, but from within his own mind. It was his own consciousness anchoring him. "You are here to see possible futures, to choose a path. Focus!" Arak forced his attention to narrow. He needed to see the possible outcomes of his actions. He needed to understand what future his choices would create. The visions came in waves. Future 1. Arak fails his trials. The Guardian continues to grow stronger, eventually breaking free from his prison. He is not evil, but his mere presence in the physical world causes chaos. Lesser spirits are drawn to his energy, creating a massive imbalance. Spiritual illnesses spread. Shamans throughout the region go mad trying to cope with forces beyond their comprehension. Within a generation, the shamanic tradition completely collapses, and humanity loses its connection to the spiritual world. Future 2. Arak completes the trials and confronts the Guardian, but acts out of renewed pride, attempting to dominate him instead of understand him. The resulting spiritual battle destroys Arak and temporarily reinforces the Guardian's seal, but the damage is done. The Guardian, now truly furious, becomes hostile. Future generations of shamans struggle against an entity that could have been an ally, but is now an enemy. Future 3. Arak completes the trials and confronts the Guardian with humility and understanding. They reach a balance. The Guardian is freed, but in a controlled way, becoming not a threat, but a powerful ally. Arak establishes new protocols, new rituals that allow safe communication with ancient spirits. He becomes the first true Worldwalker, and his example inspires a new generation of shamans who understand that spiritual power comes with responsibility. The visions faded, leaving Arak shivering and sweating despite the freezing cold. The choice was clear, but the path to the third future was the most difficult, requiring him to confront not only the Guardian, but his own continuous failings.
It demanded perfection from someone who had proven himself fallible. "I will try," Arak said to the howling wind, "not because I know I will succeed, but because it is the only right path."
The descent from the mountain was quicker, but equally dangerous. When Arak finally reached base camp, Scar greeted him with wild joy. The shaman embraced the wolf, grateful for this anchor point in physical reality. He rested for 3 days, regaining strength and mentally preparing for the final ordeal. The caves of the first fire lay 2 weeks to the south, dangerous territory where cave lions and giant bears hunted. But before leaving, Arak had an uninduced vision. He saw his old clan, saw Torak ailing, rapidly weakening. He saw other members also sick. The Guardian was draining them, not out of malice, but because the connection Arak had inadvertently created on that fateful night still existed. He saw Kale, the hunter who had always despised him, trying to help, but unable to do anything against a threat that could not be pierced with spears. And he saw something else, a small figure leaving the camp, traveling north. It was a young girl, perhaps 15, with eyes that shone with spiritual sensitivity. She was seeking help, seeking the exiled shaman, who, according to vague rumors, still lived in the desolate lands. She was seeking Arak. "She will arrive at the caves of the first fire at approximately the same time as I do," Arak realized. "This is no coincidence. It is destiny. Or perhaps the spirits arranging pieces on the board." He looked at Scar. "We are near the end, my friend. One last trial, and then we will confront the Guardian. Together or alone, I will complete this." The wolf howled, a long, haunting sound that echoed through the mountains. It was a howl of defiance, of determination, of courage in the face of the impossible.